week, and I've been doing work around the budget and state government for over 20 years and learned several new tidbits in the conversation. So it's always useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Kevin Mulligan.
Yeah, good morning. So I'm a legislative aide with Senator Runstead. Big issues from our constituency, UIA for sure, economy, gas prices, that stuff.
Okay. Kevin Belfour.
Hi, I'm a constituent aide for Senator Stamas. We've been hearing a lot of stuff with the economy and gas prices as well, and increasing direct care workers' wages as well.
Okay. Martin Johnson.
Hi, I'm Marty Johnson. I'm going to be interning for Senator Curtis Ratel's office this summer. And one of the things I really thought was interesting last week was a lot of the de-escalation techniques, especially like Matt, seeing the tone of the constituents and, I don't know, doing more to listen instead of be confrontational, I guess.
Great. I'm glad you found that helpful. Thank you for that. That helps us. Hopefully pronounce this next name correctly. Saeed Mirabedini.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Saeed Mirabedini. I work for Representative Robbie's office. I'm newly hired legislative assistant there. I wasn't able to make it to last week's meeting, but one policy issue constituents are reaching out is about the budget and their priorities about that. And we've been hearing a lot.
Super. Emma White. Emma, we're asking people to introduce themselves and if they were here last week to let us know one takeaway from last week or a pressing issue you're hearing about from your constituents.
Okay, yeah, my name is Emma with the Office of Senator Brinks. I am the Director of Constituent Relations. I was here for just a little bit last week, but I couldn't stay very long. So something that our constituents have brought up a lot is also budget related issues. Yeah, we've heard a lot about the budget as that process has been going down.
Thank you. C. Clark. If you could introduce yourself. Okay. Maybe they'll be able to do so in a moment. I see Lisa Curtis. Lisa, you there?
I am here, Arnold. Good morning, everybody. Sorry I was a little late and I was slow to unmute. Anyways, I've just enjoyed your training each week. So appreciate the training. Looking forward to this morning's. I'm particularly, I always love the professional development stuff, time management, printing guidelines, everything that we can to be better employees. So thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. I appreciate your support. Tony Lindsay.
Good morning, everyone. I'm with Lisa. I have enjoyed it all, and I've been part of the planning process with this, and it's been a great experience, and I'm excited to help more.
Great. Thanks, Tony. And Tony and Lisa, in case folks aren't aware, with the House Business Office, and they've been tremendous in helping plan these sessions out, along with Kristen Aldridge from the Senate Business Office. Really appreciate their partnership and support. Did I miss anybody? Okay, well, I see our first presenter is here as well, and that is Bob Schneider with the Citizens Research Council. And Bob is here to chat with us today and inform us about the various tax cut proposals that are floating around the legislature. As you all know, several have been mentioned as part of the budget process, and especially given the surplus in general fund that the state has. So Bob's going to run through those. Please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. This is meant to be informative for you, so you can answer questions and better understand the issues that your members will be dealing with and the questions you get from constituents. So with that, Matt, I believe you're going to moderate this one.
Happy to do so. We'll let Bob begin. One reminder I wanted to point out is that we will be giving certificates for those who attend the legislative staff trainings through the fall. So we've had 2 so far, and we'll have 1 more, and you can always catch up on one of the 3 in the following year. And then we also give out those certificates. So if we missed you last year and you got to your 3rd, let us know. And if not, please continue to participate this year. So with that, I'll let Bob take it away.
Thank you so much, Matt and Arnold. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Good morning to everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and join you today, and very happy to present today in support of IPSR's, I think very effective legislative training sessions that sound like they're bearing fruit for all of you, which is great to hear. My name is Bob Schneider. As Matt said, I'm the Senior Research Associate at the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. I have a pretty heavy focus in what I do on state budget and finance issues. And actually was one of you at a time in my life, worked for probably about 17 or 18 years at the House Fiscal Agency, the nonpartisan House Fiscal Agency for the House. Also spent about 5 years at the State Budget Office on the executive branch side of things in budget development. So pleased to be here today. Hope this is a real helpful session for you. I have a single monitor, so I'm going to be looking at different things. Matt or Arnold, please, if I miss a hand raise and you want to interrupt, please do that. Please go ahead and stop me, and we can take a question if I miss it. I'll try to be attentive to that as well. I'm going to try to share my screen if that works for all of you. Let's see if I can do this effectively. Here, share. Okay, can everyone see full screen view of my title page? Awesome, awesome. I'm over 50. Sometimes the technology gets me, but it looks like I did it right this time. So most of you are aware the state budget is hopefully set to be wrapped up here in the next coming couple months. I keep hearing July 4th as a good proxy for a finish date. We'll see if that actually happens. As Arnold alluded to, we have very large surpluses and pretty healthy revenue growth, at least for now, in the state budget. So that has turned a lot of attention to tax relief. The governor had put forward a tax relief proposal having to do with the earned income tax credit, sort of re-expanding the earned income tax credit, and to give some relief from the retirement tax changes that were implemented a decade ago. The legislature also spoke on tax relief, passed a bill that the governor vetoed previously that would have cut the income tax rate, also done some changes to the retirement tax, and established a per child tax credit effectively for taxpayers. We're going to kind of look at those different proposals and see what fits. So what I want to do today is kind of 3 things. We'll do a quick review of where we stand with revenues and where we stand on the spending side, where the House and the Senate and landed versus the governor, and what the best guess outcome of those budget deliberations might be. Then we'll look specifically at some of the tax cut proposals that were offered and look at the revenue implications of those. And our goal there, my goal would be to help you try to understand how much tax relief probably fits, how much might be coming given the budget, given the revenue situation. And then before as I conclude, I want to close with some context and kind of taking a look at our recent revenue history in Michigan, and also sort of a historical look at our tax burden in Michigan. Are we a high tax state or are we a low tax state relative to our neighbors and the rest of the 50 states? So I hope this will be a helpful presentation. You're going to see our email address, crcmich.org for the Citizens Research Council at the end of the presentation, crcmich.org. I'd love any feedback. If I'm trying to hit, you're all legislative staff, so you have a familiarity with the budget. I'd welcome any feedback on how helpful this was or other things you might have wanted me to talk about. I give these presentations often, but not always to a legislative group. So have any feedback at the end of this, please shoot me an email or something. You'll find my email on our website. So let's get started with a look at the state revenue picture. I worked for about 25 years on state budget and state finance issues. I can say the revenue picture right now is pretty unprecedented. We have, as currently forecast back at our last revenue consensus conference in January, pretty healthy revenue growth forecasted. And we'll talk about why this happened. We have a whole ton of money in the bank. The state has two big, as many of you may know, two big major revenue funds. Our general fund, general purpose revenue, which accounts for 98% of the budget deliberations outside of education. And we have our school aid fund, which accounts for 98% of the budget deliberations related to education and a little bit in terms of universities and community colleges as well. The amount in the bank and the growth is that we have projected right now, I can't remember a time where it was even really close to this. So we're in a really good situation. We're going to talk today about how we got here. And then we'll, before we move out of revenues, we'll talk about will it last? As you may know, we have another revenue forecast coming up just next week. So first, a quick refresher on our revenue history coming out of COVID. So what this slide does is it shows the revenue forecast for those two major revenue funds that we just talked about. Far left side in the blue bar, it's the January 2020 consensus, and this is all fiscal year. I picked one fiscal year 22 revenue, where we thought we were going to be pre-COVID in January 2020. And then as we work our way to the right, both for the GFGP and the school aid fund chart, we see each progressive subsequent forecast as it changed over time. And two things jump right out at you, are very clear from the chart. Immediately after COVID, if we look at the far left in the blue bar, both for general fund and the school aid fund, revenue projections plummeted. If we look at the first two bars in the general fund side, we went from a projection of $11.5 billion general fund before COVID down to $10.1 billion in the months right after, when things looked horrible. School aid fund, not much different, a little bit smaller decrease, but went from 14.6 billion to 13.9 billion. So between January 2020, May of 2020, just those few months, governor had just introduced her budget in February. We lost we thought we were going to lose $2.5 billion in revenue from those two sources. That's almost 10% of the revenue, not quite 10%, but in that realm. There was an instant reaction to that. If you've been around long enough in the legislature, you know we did a lot of budget cutting. We did real budget cuts, hiring freeze. We did some fund shifting. We got some support from the federal government that helped us cut the general fund and school aid fund budgets. But we reacted instantly to the fact that we thought the sky was falling on revenues. You look at the rest of the chart, you see that did not happen. As we went from August 2020, January of 2021, May 2021, and then this last January, revenues rebounded, and they rebounded strongly, and they they didn't just rebound, to get back to the pre-COVID levels. They boomed well past where we thought we were going to be at before COVID. In this last January 2022 forecast, we're $2.5 billion above where we thought we were going to be in the January, before anybody even knew what COVID was. What drove that? I think undoubtedly is a whole lot of federal stimulus, the tax refund checks that we all received, 3 rounds of them, enhanced unemployment compensation that many received due to job losses. The Paycheck Protection Program, those types of programs added a ton of income to the economy and helped incomes and spending rebound, not only rebound, but sort of thrive. In 2020, personal income in Michigan grew over 7%. That was like the highest growth in the year of COVID, the highest growth that we'd had in like 3 decades. So what are the implications of that then for the budget? When we talk about these huge budget surpluses, that's kind of what drove that. When we thought revenues were going to tank, we adjusted the budget to try to live within what we thought were going to be very constrained resources. And then again, that not only did that not happen, but we saw revenues boom. So we have when fiscal year 2021 ended, the last fiscal year that we closed, we had over $7 billion in revenue surplus, revenue balance, kind of sitting in the bank among those 2 funds, most of it general fund, but almost $3 billion in school aid fund. So again, why do we have that? Because we cut the budget expecting revenues to fall, and they didn't. That's a part of it. And then not only did they not fall, but they boomed, lots of stimulus, lots of income, and that made revenues even stronger. And all of that was sitting in the bank at the end of fiscal year 2021. So lots of money in the bank. But if you're trying to evaluate the room in the budget for either permanent investment, spending increases in state priorities, or on the tax side, if you're looking to make sort of permanent tax relief part of your budget plan, your interest is more that money in the bank helps, but it's one-time money. You want to look at annually, where is our revenue, where is our annual revenue versus where our annual spending trend happens to be. So what this chart looks at is it compares the annual the annual revenue projections. So for general fund, that top row revenue projections is the January 2022 consensus revenue estimates against baseline spending. And that's basically everything that's currently appropriated. So that fiscal 22 number is all the general fund, almost $14 billion. What's already appropriated, the base budget plus lots of supplementals and one-time funding. And then if we just want to maintain ongoing spending, no increases, nothing that the governor proposed in 23, nothing that the legislature might have included that's new in the budget, what does spending look like? And that's what's in the baseline spending for both general fund and school aid fund. So how do we interpret this? If you look at 24 and 25 and look out long term, we probably have about $1 billion in ongoing general fund revenue above that baseline spending revenue. That means that baseline spending number. That means we probably have $1 billion available that we can either add to spending, address state spending issues, or to give us, to give back to the taxpayers in the form of tax relief. On the school aid fund side, even more, about a little over $2 billion and growing, depending on whether that baseline spending trend holds. We have even more on the school aid fund side to either invest or give back in tax relief. That's as of now. So as you know, we have a revenue consensus conference coming up next Friday that will be very critical to all this. That's how things looked before the budget, back in January. The conference next week will be a very interesting one to watch. Lots of uncertainty in the economy, as I heard several of you mentioned that the economy is a big priority, even that you're hearing from constituents. On the negative side, Federal Reserve is hiking interest rates and probably will continue to do that. Lots of uncertainty regarding the war in Ukraine and how that's impacting energy, access to energy and energy prices. Supply chain issues continue. I think the likelihood of a recession in the next year or two has at least gone up. I don't know that I've seen a lot of people forecast it yet, but likelihood goes up. But on the positive side, in Michigan, our employment keeps going up. So we lost a ton of jobs immediately after COVID, but we're getting back close to the pre-COVID level, and employment is going up month after month. It'll be very interesting to see what happens next Friday. My guess is that the early if you look at numbers from both fiscal agencies, it looks like fiscal year 22 current year revenues are pretty strong, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see those forecasts go up for 22. The big question will be for fiscal year 23, 24, and the out years. What are the economists, both in the fiscal agencies and at the University of Michigan, that help consult on this process? What do they see happening to the national economy? Is a recession coming? If that's part of the forecast, we could see downgrades to those out year revenues, which could affect that $1 billion in general fund that we just showed, and $2 billion in school aid fund. Maybe that's not there anymore then in the out years if those forecasts turn sour. Okay, so that's the revenue side. Now let's take a look at the other factor that's going to determine the amount of room that might be left for tax relief, which is deliberations on the state budget and on the spending side. Where will we land now that the House has passed its budget, Senate's passed its budget? We know the governor introduced her budget in February. What's the likely landing point for this budget? And I'm gonna outline what my best guess is for a landing point on the budget, and I will be very forthright here. I call this a best guess. Might even be called a best wild guess, because there's a lot of directions that the budget could go. As the legislature, both the House and the Senate negotiate with each other and with the governor. But let's look high level. This chart just gives you a very high level overview of where each chamber and the governor had landed on the budget. So remember, in February, the governor proposed the budget with a lot of spending growth, specifically a whole lot of one-time spending. You'll see in the general fund, the governor proposed about $12.6 billion in ongoing spending, so significant growth there, but even more one-time spending, over $3 billion on things like business attraction, workforce development, information technology upgrades. On the K-12 side, again, the governor had a lot of new spending proposed in her budget. Over $18.8 billion in ongoing school aid spending, and over $4 billion in one-time things like school infrastructure, teacher recruitment initiatives, school mental health, things like that. So the House and the Senate said yes to some stuff for sure, but said no to a lot of the spending increases. So held the line much more on spending increases. You'll see the House and the Senate in terms of ongoing spending, both in the general fund and the school aid fund, much lower than the governor, relatively close to one another, $11.5 billion in the general fund, $16.5 billion on the school aid fund. The one thing that you may have heard about, it sounds like you may have had a session on the budget last week. The House put a heavy emphasis on its own one-time spending, and that was the focus there was to draw down on pension, unfunded pension debt, and put a heavy focus for the state, local governments, K-12 schools, using some of our one-time money to pay down that type of legacy debt. So where do we probably land? My best guess deal here just assumes that the governor brings the legislature a little closer to her. And maybe we land about $12 billion in ongoing general fund spending, 17.5 and these are just ballpark guesses. And I'm guessing we do have a lot of one-time spending that ends up getting approved. That's probably some combination of the governor's one-time spending priorities, and I'm sure the House's debt payments and kind of paying down debt is probably at least a part of that final deliberations too. I think the K-12 schools actually probably like that concept quite a lot too. So this is a sort of a predicted landing spot for budget deliberations that allows us then to look. We know where we think revenues are going to be. Here's roughly where spending might come down, and we can look again then at that same chart, look at our revenue projections for the general fund, our revenue projections for the school aid fund, and now instead of the baseline spending, I put here's our best guess of the budget deal that might be imminent, something in the ballpark. What's still left if we pass something that looks like it could be a compromise budget deal? How much is still left for tax relief? And key takeaways, again, if you look out at fiscal year 24 and 25 in this slide, on the general fund, still looks like ongoing, we have room for about $1 billion in general fund tax relief. And there's still a pretty, if my best guess budget deal comes to fruition, you'd still have over $1 billion on the school aid fund side. And notice the negatives, where we're spending more than the revenue that we're receiving in 22 and 23. That's basically drawing down that money in the bank. But even after we draw some of that down, we still, between the general fund and the school aid fund, have $3.7 billion in the bank. Goes from 7, we maybe cut it in half. If this is the budget deal that comes into place. So that's very interesting, because the one signal we've gotten so far in terms of what either chamber might be thinking in terms of its own tax cut goals is the Senate in its budget had signaled that it was it made a deposit to reserve some money for tax relief, and it pointed to a $1 billion ongoing tax cut and a $1 billion one-time, tax relief of some form, and that looks very much like what the general fund forecast in this will be. We do have about $1 billion in room for ongoing, and we have still $1 billion in the bank in the general fund for some type of one-time tax relief. So that Senate signal looks like it could be doable if the budget deal looks similar to the compromise that I outlined. Again, the reminder, we'll see what happens next Friday with revenues, because if we have significant downgrades due to a projected recessionary type forecast in 23 or 24 in some of the out years, that could torpedo the revenues, and then we'll see what really happens. I don't make the budget deals. We'll see what really happens with the compromise on the budget. But something like that Senate signal looks like it could be doable. Okay, just checking the chat. I saw something pop up, but that's not a question. Okay, so let's look at let's look at some of the tax relief proposals that have been put on the table, and we'll evaluate. What are the revenue costs of those tax relief proposals, and what do they mean? We'll sort of get underneath what it may mean to your constituents and taxpayers in Michigan. We're going to start with the retirement, with the changes in the income tax on retirement income. And both the governor and the legislature have both chimed in on this component of tax relief with their own proposals. So just as background, remember in 2011, we made some significant changes to the treatment of retirement income. Prior to 2011, in those changes that were implemented by the legislature and signed by Governor Snyder at that time, Public pension. So if I receive a public pension, that public pension income was fully exempt from the income tax. And then if I had private pension or certain types of private retirement income, they weren't fully exempt, but there were really significant, healthy deductions that I could take for that income. So just for instance, a married couple filing jointly with $100,000 in IRA or pension income would be able to fully, those deductions would have been big enough where they could have fully they could have fully deducted that $100,000 in under the current thresholds there. What happened in the 2011 changes is that favorable treatment of retirement income was pulled back significantly. So no more full exemption for public pensions, and the real favorable deductions for private retirement income was pulled back. All retirement income was treated the same, and effectively we have a single standard deduction was established against all income, whether it's retirement income or earned income, for retirees who, and it was limited to those that reached the age of 67. So if I had retirement income when I was 60, I had favorable treatment before 2011. After 2011, and I won't talk about the tiers, those that were established at that time, but basically a 60-year-old today wouldn't get any type of favorable treatment for his or her retirement income. So we've seen two proposals to sort of peel back those 2011 changes. On this page, I talk about the governor's proposal. She proposed basically repealing those changes and slowly over time phasing back to the old rules, where we would have the fully exempt public pensions and favorable treatment for certain private retirement income. And that would be done over time. So we'd start in tax year 2022. It would apply to those 65 and older, and we'd phase back 25%, and eventually by tax year 2025, everyone would be back to the old, would be allowed to go back to the old rules. We'd be 100% back to the old standards. That came with a price tag of, looking forward, once it was fully phased in, almost a $500 million. And the governor proposed all of that, be borne by the general fund. So she was going to make the school aid fund, any impact on the school aid fund would be exempt. It would all fall to the general fund. The legislature came up with a modified proposal. Instead of completely shifting back to the old rules pre-2011, the legislature provided some more immediate tax savings, but never reverted back completely to the old standards. So instead, the deduction that was set in the 2011 legislation, which was $20,000 in this first bullet, $20,000 for single filers, $40,000 for joint filers, would be exempted for all income. So whether it's retirement income, whether it's earned income of some kind, that was the exemption that was set and limited to those who reached 67 years old. The legislature's plan that ended up being vetoed, part of the package vetoed by the governor, was to advance that, keep that in place, but allow those as young as 62 to immediately still had unexempted retirement income. That plan would have exempted another $20,000 for a single filer, another $40,000 for joint filers, specifically in retirement income. And I use the example here, if I'm if I'm of retirement age and reached at least 62 years old, and I have $10,000 in earned income, $40,000 in retirement income, under the legislative plan, that first standard deduction would have taken my $10,000 in earned income, allowed me to deduct it. Another $10,000 in the retirement income would have been deducted. I would have still had $30,000 in retirement income that I hadn't deducted yet. So then that next phase, that tier 2 of the exemption would have kicked in, taken another $20,000 of retirement income, and made it exempt from the income tax, and I would have been left with $10,000 in taxable income. So just one specific example of how that would have worked. Again, long run here, the price tag of this, again, once it was phased in, about $635 million, a little higher than what the governor's proposal would have called for. And I thought I would run through some examples of some specific taxpayers and how that tax proposal would have impacted them down the road. So let's look at a few examples to show how much taxpayers of different ages and different retirement incomes would benefit. So first here we look at a 60-year-old single retiree with a public pension, we'll say $40,000, no other income. After 2011, again, there are no special exemptions for any of that public pension income. This 60-year-old would be paying the income tax on that full $40,000. Under the governor's plan, since that person was 60, remember the phase-in is both by age and by the percentage of that we phase back to the old rules. In tax year 2020, tax year 2022 and 2023, no impact for this individual because they're still not 62. Only once they get to only once we get to tax year 2024 does that person qualify under the phase-in. And at that point, 75% or $30,000 of that public pension would be exempt. Here I have it in yellow. Wherever you see yellow, that means I'm doing better than I am under the current rules. Green means I'm back to being exactly where I would have been under the old rules pre-2011. So by 2024, this taxpayer is doing better. They're beginning to have some of that public pension income exempt. By 2025, it's fully exempt. They're back to being green. They're back to being as well off as they were under the old rules. In this specific case, with the legislative plan, sorry about that, this taxpayer would have been once they turned 62, they would have been eligible for the full 20, both tiers, 20,000 plus 20,000 exemption. They would have been better. They would have been back to the being equally well off as they were under the old rules a little quicker because they had $40,000 in public pension income, and by 2024 they would have had that fully exempted again. If this taxpayer had earned a little more, maybe a $50,000 public pension, the difference between the governor and the legislative plan is they would have never quite gotten fully back to having all of that income exempt. Look at another taxpayer. This is a 63-year-old married couple with pretty healthy combined retirement income from $100,000 from a private pension and IRA distributions. For this couple, again, they aren't age eligible under the governor's proposal right now. No special exemptions of any of that because they're not 67 yet. Under the governor's plan, they would have started to get a benefit starting in tax year 2023. Based on their age, and by 2025, again, they would have the exemption that the governor phased back to would have eventually covered their full pension income. They'd be back to where they were under the old rules. Here's where the legislature's plan differed. They would in tax year 2023, this couple would have gotten a bigger boost from the legislative plan, $80,000. They would have gotten the full $40,000 a year standard deduction for joint filers, plus the other $40,000 in the second tier. So they would have had an $80,000 exemption right away, but it doesn't go up over time. They never get back to where they were pre-2011. Because the legislature does keep it, it allows 60, it allows you to get the exemption sooner, but there's still the firm $80,000 cap for joint filers. And then just one more example, this is an older retiree, 69 years old with $60,000 in private pension income. Again, this retiree is already 67. They're already eligible to get the $20,000 single exemption for a filer who reaches 67 years old. So in the first year, they'd technically be eligible for special treatment under the governor's plan, but for them, it's preferable to stay with the new rules. And deduct their $20,000, they would wait until fiscal year 23, tax year 2023, before they get a benefit. And then eventually, under the governor's plan, once that's fully phased in, they'd be able to fully deduct that $60,000 in private retirement income. For the House, again, the legislature's plan. The legislative plan provided an immediate boost that would have immediately got this single retiree back to a $40,000 exemption, the 20 plus 20, but it would have never got the retiree back to being able to fully exempt that income under the as they would have been able to under the old rules. So again, some specific examples of how that policy will change for different retirees. So let's look at some of the other tax proposals. The cutting the income tax rate to 3.9%, that was part of the legislature's plan in Senate Bill 768 that was eventually vetoed. What's that mean for the average household? If you have $50,000 in taxable income, probably means about $175 per year for you. Each 0.1, each time we reduce the tax rate by 1/10%, it's about $340 million in revenue lost under the legislature's plan. That amounts to about $1.1 billion in revenue foregone for the state. There were also income tax credits discussed. The first was the EITC, that was part of the governor's proposal. The EITC at one time, before the 2011 changes we just talked about, equaled 20% of a similar existing federal credit. But during the 2011 deliberations, that was reduced to 6% of the federal credit. The governor's proposal is to restore it to, again, the level pre-2011. In the end, that means more the maximum credit for low-income tax filers grows to just over $1,200. It probably means the average, the state budget office estimated the average credit would go up from about $300 to $450. Price tag there, long-term, is about $270 million. The legislature had proposed a different credit, a child tax credit for dependents who are 19 years of age or younger. That came with a price tag of about $775 million, and would have been effective for all households on a per child basis with eligible dependents. So big picture then, looking at some of these proposals that have already been put on the table, if you look at the total, if we look at this full menu, and if we look at the total revenue foregone, if we add all these things up, the retirement tax revisions, I sort of did a hybrid, something in between the governor's and the legislative proposal. But the overall cost of this is about $2.7 billion. Remember, prior to, in our previous slides, we have about $2.4 billion in available revenue for tax relief. The problem comes is all of these focus on the income tax, and the income tax, generally the great majority of the revenue loss falls to the general fund. So the handcuff with tax relief is for all of these, since they impact the general fund, anywhere from probably 85 to even 100% of the revenue loss here would fall to the general fund. So it's the general fund, the $1 billion in the general fund that would really be the constraint on all of these tax cuts. Again, if revenues are where we think they'll be, and there's no major changes next Friday, and if the final budget deliberations end up similar to my best guess here. And unless you bring in the sales tax or something different outside of the income tax, it's that $1 billion in general fund that really puts the limit on income tax cuts, because the great majority of the revenue loss is going to fall to the general fund from those types of tax cuts. Wanted to mention one more. We have a lot of money in the bank. The other option is one-time tax relief. We could fund a whole lot of that, both on the general fund and the school aid fund side. The sales tax for gasoline was also talked about as an option. And what we see is if gas prices end up, they're a little higher than this now. They weren't that long ago, but if they stay in the $4 to $4.25 per gallon range, a six-month suspension of the sales tax on gasoline probably costs the state in the neighborhood of $650 to $700 million, which again, we have a lot of one-time revenue that would make that very, we could fund that. That would not cause any kind of budget problems. We have a lot of money still in the bank there. That hits a lot of different places. And the difference here is, since it's the sales tax, the biggest revenue loss falls to the school aid fund, more than $500 million. But the general fund takes a hit there as well, a much smaller one. Revenue sharing takes a hit. Our comprehensive transportation fund, which is receives some auto-related sales tax revenue, would take a hit as well. But in the big picture, since we have a lot of one-time revenue, we also this would be fundable. There aren't any constraints on doing this, or even, quite frankly, a significantly larger. The Senate signaled $1 billion one-time tax relief. Maybe that's the form of a income tax rebate of some kind, which would be another option that hasn't specifically been put on the table to my knowledge, but could be what folks are thinking about. So I know I only have a few minutes left. Just really quickly, just to add some context to this, let's talk about tax burden in Michigan and our recent revenue history and what that's looked like. And again, is Michigan a high tax state or a low tax state? If we look at our overall, this is state tax burden since 1991. And by state tax burden, it's total state tax revenues in the blue line, and then general fund and school aid fund tax revenues on the orange line, those major discretionary revenues. They look very much the same. A couple things to note. Mid 1990s, they both went up significantly. Why? Because of Proposal A. We did major school finance reform at that time. The state government raised its sales tax, also established some complementary taxes to take on and take away the local property tax burden for funding schools. Much of that was replaced by state tax revenue. So it went up, but since about 2000, it's gone down. We've seen, and in fact, we see state tax burden, tax collections as a percentage of Michigan personal income really back to levels very similar to what they were prior to Proposal A. So we took on some extra tax burden from the locals, but our overall tax burden has really gone down back to where it was prior to Proposal A. When we look at combined state and local tax burden, there was a interesting report put out by the Tax Foundation fairly recently that I think helps answer, are we a high or a low tax state? When you look at state and local tax collections as a percent of net, they use net national product as their denominator. Michigan is 46th among states, and here we compare it. Here I pulled out some numbers for some of our neighbors. We're relatively low in state and local combined tax burden right now versus our neighbors and versus the rest of the country. And then it's helpful to take a look at our recent revenue history, especially on the general fund side. So this looks at GFGP revenue. School aid fund has looked different. School aid fund has been a little healthier, but remember, we are just kind of climbing out of a fairly steep revenue decline for our general fund, general purpose revenues. Between 2000 and 2010, you'll see the top line here is actual revenue. The blue line on the bottom is inflation adjusted revenue. If we look at actual general fund revenue, it went down from about $10.7 billion in 2000 to about $7.7 billion in 2010. And that came with some significant budget ramifications. We had some significant cuts to higher education during this time and shortly after even. Revenue sharing payments were cut back pretty significantly, and we're kind of just getting back now to the level that that we were at in 2000. And in fact, if you look at the inflation adjusted line, even with all the healthy revenue growth that's currently forecast, by 2024, we're still going to be more than 20% down in terms of overall general fund. So when looking at tax relief, I'll close here. And when looking at tax relief, I've always advised policymakers, look at the budget first, decide how big the state budget should be. If we're doing things we shouldn't be doing, then cut them, and let that help dictate, how much money then we have for tax relief. A lot of times we put the tax cutting first and then try to make the budget fit. And I think too often that means we're nibbling around on the fringes of the budget and instead of making a decision, how big should state government be? Let's set what that parameter is. How much do we need in tax revenue? And to the extent that we have more, then let's give it back to the citizenry. So I think it's 10 o'clock right now, so I'm going to stop. Arnold, I hope I haven't chewed up more time than I should have. If there's time, happy to take questions, but appreciate again the opportunity to be here. Hope this was helpful.
Thanks so much. So we do have a little bit of time for questions or topics. If people wanted to go back over anything, you can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat. I guess I'll start. You mentioned, Bob, that we have had trouble forecasting the budget a month or two in advance, but it seems like tax cuts require forecasting quite a bit in advance in terms of not just overall revenue pictures, but things like demographic changes and economic changes and responsiveness to tax cuts. So how can we sort of set permanent tax policy given that we're changing the overall revenue projections every few months?
Yeah, I think it calls for, for some caution and maybe, some forward-looking, some forward-looking thoughts before we go too far, like I did. But right now, I would say it's pretty clear that if our budget if our budget lands in the realm of my best guess, you do really have some significant room for tax cutting. I think the important part for a state or a local government, is to do we have a healthy budget stabilization fund that can help us get past economic fluctuations that may happen? And we are, in the state, we are getting up there again where we have a relatively healthy rainy day fund available to us that we can then draw on in those years where we may have a temporary recession. But I think the key thing is two things. Decide what's the proper size of state government? What's the proper size of the state budget? I would say that first, and then always look. When you're considering tax cuts, look out at what your expenditure trends will be 3 or 4 years out, and those revenue projections 3 or 4 years out, and make sure that you're aligned. Those two trends align in a way that if you want to cut revenue by $500 million, that's really available, that you're not shorting yourself by, for instance, leaning on leaning on our one-time fund balances to fund permanent tax relief, where once those fund balances run out, now all of a sudden you're in a predicament where you need to either take away the tax relief or cut the budget significantly in ways that you didn't anticipate. So I think it's just always good to be forward-looking, and then continue to do what we've been doing, which is when we get the opportunity, put money into that rainy day fund, so we have that buffer to navigate downtimes.
I've got a follow-up to that. If we look at tax cuts really as another spending program, and I think you're hinting at this, then one of the things we need to look at is, as you noted, is it built on one-time funding, or is it built on projected revenues moving forward? In other words, is it sustainable? Is the state spending this money to give money back to the taxpayers through a tax cut sustainable over time? And I don't want to put you on the spot, and maybe I missed it, but of the tax cuts that have been proposed, are any one more sustainable than the other?
So all the tax cuts proposed have sort of been income tax related. So, cut the rate, change the treatment of retirement income tax credits. So no one of them is, regardless of how you cut the income tax, it's sort of what's that base revenue reduction that's likely to result from the cut, whether it's a rate cut or a credit, or or the change in the treatment of retirement income. It does look like, that those numbers we showed early in the slides looks like taking that long-term outlook and looking at what spending ought to look like over the next several years, and what revenues are projected as of now to look like over the next several years, that you probably do have room for $1 billion, whether it comes from rate cuts or credits or retirement income. You probably have room for about $1 billion. I'm sure the legislature and the governor will wait until they get the revised figures next week to make sure those still apply. But if those revenue forecasts don't change considerably, you can still afford about $1 billion in general fund tax relief without infringing on, necessitating those unanticipated budget reductions that you referred to, Arnold. So that is sustainable, and how we get there is less important than making sure you stay within that revenue parameter.
And of course, Matt noted earlier, and then you noted as well, the projections are exactly what they are, projections. When the pandemic started, folks thought the bottom was going to fall out of the economy, and it did not, mostly because of federal spending. That's going to stop here. And then you mentioned the dreaded R word yourself, recession. So what seems like maybe a rosy next 6 or 12 months might turn south pretty quickly.
It could, and the one helper on that is if we hit a recession, We do have some rainy day fund balances and hopefully we'd be willing to draw on some of those to help ease the downfall. But that's always you're exactly right. That's always something to be thoughtful of as you look at tax relief is, what are the risks?
So we do have time for one more question. If there's anybody who wants to ask one in the chat or raise their hand. Or if not, I'll just ask you, you mentioned that the general fund and school aid have different revenue sources, but of course we have had some fungibility over time with some things going back and forth, community colleges and education funding. So I guess to what extent are these, do they have to pay attention to each one of these as a completely separate fund and revenue sources? And to what extent can they just think about it as the state budget as a whole and then figure out what needs to move between the two funds later?
Yeah, when you're thinking about tax relief, you do need to be very cognizant of that. And if you're gonna, so if you want more general fund tax relief, if you want to cut the income tax to 3.9% and do some retirement and do some of the retirement stuff, and maybe that ends up costing $1.5 billion. We know that isn't sustainable, that would not be sustainable on the general fund side of things. Matt, you just hinted though, and there are ways to recalibrate on that, and one way would be, we've got $1 billion in general fund in higher education that funds university operations, and historically we have in the past used school aid fund to fund university operations. In fact, we still do. We've drawn down on the amount, but someone that really wanted tax relief, more tax relief than the $1 billion that I've shown could be sustainable, you could, on the spending side, say, well, you know what? I have more school aid fund than I think I need from my perspective. So I'm going to use more of that for universities. That frees up general fund. And that allows you to actually, that in that sense, you could then start to fit more general fund tax relief in. But I will tell you, as you all may be aware too, I think that would probably be the #1 goal of K-12 school groups right now, is to prevent that exact thing from happening. I think their #1 priority right now is school aid fund needs to be K-12 and not not continuing to draw off the school aid fund for community colleges and higher education as an instance, which politically then makes that very difficult. So if you're going to pass more tax relief on that, assuming that that's going to happen, I would suggest getting that spending adjustment worked out before you do the tax relief, because that would be a very difficult strategy to implement, I think, with a lot of political pushback.
Well, thanks so much. Bob made his contact information available, and we'll have the presentation on our website afterwards as well. So we appreciate you being here. And I think it's now time to move to the professional development panel. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Greatly appreciate it. And as Matt noted, the presentation will be available on our website. And Bob is obviously available to you as staff, as is the Citizens Research Council generally, a great asset we have in this state. Thanks again. Well, we are going to move to our next session on focused on some professional development, and in concert with the House and Senate business offices, we put together 2 speakers for you today. The first is Danielle Hook, who is Learning and Development Manager for Michigan State University Human Resources. Danielle leads the design and implementation of learning and development strategies, including training sessions, facilitating work sessions, assessing learning needs, and managing organizational projects. And Danielle has agreed to talk to us today about time management, and something that's pretty important right now as legislative action picks up over the next month and a half. Danielle? Floor is yours.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you this morning. Happy Friday. It's a great time to be here in Michigan, right? One of the few times we can say that a year. So hi, I took some time to think about time management, and time management for each of you may be very different right now. So the context in which we're all working, most folks are being asked to do more with less. Between personal and professional lives, there is a lot of opportunity for increased levels of stress, and we all kind of find ourselves working in a high stress work environment. Depending on the nature of the stress and the time management issues you're having, there may be a whole wide variety of solutions that could be of assistance. So the goal of this presentation is to give you some things to think about, a variety of different approaches you may take to finding better time management skills, because there are many different approaches based on the source of the time management issue. We could go into a lot of detail on every single one of these, but given the time we have, I'm going to do a high-level overview of some things to think about, and you can find additional resources on all of these different areas if there's something that resonates with you. So I want to pause for just a moment before I get started and have you reflect on what causes you stress. Now, I don't want this to cause a stress response, but I want you to think about some of the sources of stress in your life. You can jot these down if you want to do that. Identify maybe 2 or 3 professional, personal things. I'll give you a moment to think on this. I think the idea of stress has become so ubiquitous that sometimes it can be hard for us to pinpoint the specific sources of stress in our lives, because it starts to just feel like a constant state of being. But if we can get specific about our sources, we can better understand the interventions to help relieve some of those stresses. So what is stress? It is our body's response to pressure. That response can be mental or cognitive, chemical, even physical, emotional, behavioral, or multiple dimensions here at the same time. So as we experience a stress, our body responds in a very unique way to ourselves, but across multiple systems and functions that we have. And these things can, over time, enable us to be less resilient and less reactive. And the chemical responses our body has to stress can also be problematic. So we want to understand how these things are showing up for us and also have tools and techniques for mitigating them. We think about resilience. You've probably heard this term before. It's becoming more popular in everyday conversation. Resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changing circumstances. I think we can all agree the last few years have been dramatically changing circumstances for all of us in all areas of our lives. And so resilience is, how do we respond to that? How do we take those blows and bounce back without being completely knocked off of our game? We can identify stressors from a number of areas, and usually they're not only isolated within themselves, they're being affected by other dimensions as well. Stressors can come from professional demands, personal demands, major life changes, relationships, responsibilities, finances, trauma, and there are many more not represented here. But thinking about the sources of these things and how they influence the sources of other areas in your life can be important. Some of these things we have control over, some of them we do not, but identifying and understanding them is a great place to begin in finding solutions and managing that stress response. The reason I talk about this is because I really appreciate this graphic. There is a certain degree of stress that is actually useful to us, but too little stress and too much stress can actually be a detriment. So this green area represents when we don't have enough stress to get us moving. This is kind of being laid back or inactive. It's underload. The yellow area is what they describe here as optimum stress. This would be enough stress in your life to kind of get you moving and be productive in a meaningful way. The orange and the red are then overload or burnout. This is where you find exhaustion, breakdown, anxiety, panic, very unproductive levels of stress. But finding ourselves in that sweet spot can be very difficult, especially when external factors shove us into the orange and the red. But I do want to acknowledge that the goal is not no stress. The goal is the right amount of stress. There are a number of tips for building stress resilience. These are just kind of in general for a personal consideration, beginning with recognizing and identifying the sources of stress. Again, knowing where they come from gives you more opportunity to find solutions. Engaging in social support can really help us bring down those stress levels just by having community and support. Changing the perspective, so reframing problems or situations can for some people help to relieve the stress response. Mindfulness, self-compassion, and prioritization of your own needs. These are just basic self-care concepts. Boundaries are very, very important. There's emerging research that suggests the kindest and the happiest people are those who have and maintain the most meaningful boundaries in their personal and professional relationships. Time management tools, we'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. Communication can also be a tool, both providing information and receiving communication. Physical activity is a great way to help the body actually rid itself of the stress response that has been physically maintained in our system. A change of scenery really helps kind of reframe where our brain is at. And then writing or list making, offloading. The idea of offloading things out of our brain onto a source that can help us manage those is another tried and true tool for helping to manage stress. Okay. This may all be very common and understood to all of you. It is fairly basic, but I want to then go into some specific workplace tools to help you rethink how these tools might be useful to you in managing your time. So task management is the first category I want to go through. This is a basic either individual or team approach to managing the tasks that are at hand. Most of the time, workplace stresses can come from an overload of tasks or an inability to maintain, manage, and track task completion in a way that's effective. So if we think about task management, there are a few tools that are available that you may or may not have familiarity with. If you have Microsoft 365 suite, there's a tool called Microsoft Planner. This is purely a task management tool. It allows you to take individual tasks, groups of tasks, or entire project plans, put task deadlines on there, assign responsibility, track progress. There's a lot you can do with Microsoft Planner and similar tools for just offloading that management of tasks, so you're not having to keep all that inside your head or on sticky notes or whatever other system you might have. It is a great tool. There's also Kanban boards, which you may or may not have heard of. This is a way of tracking tasks in phases. So there's to do, in progress, and done. These can be a great tool for an individual to manage tasks. Also, you see these used in teams. So there's team visibility on the progress of task completion. Checklists. If you've read the checklist manifesto, you know how powerful checklists can be when applied appropriately. This is, again, an offloading tool to help us have a source for keeping track of completion of things, reducing errors without having to carry that full mental burden inside of ourselves. It's a tool we can reference and know that those are accounting for all the components that need to be completed. Again, task tracking in a tool like Microsoft Planner, or maybe you have other technology you have available to yourselves, but task tracking tools can be really useful for high demand, high stress, and quickly moving environments. Also, the idea of scheduling tasks. I'm going to move into some scheduling tips, but having dedicated time planned to complete tasks helps you ensure they're getting done. In environments where there is a lot of activity, a lot of demands coming in, and we oftentimes work in a reactionary way, sometimes the only way to ensure we get tasks completed on time is to schedule dedicated time to work on those things. So in the spirit of time management, I want to talk about some of your tools that are available to manage time. Calendar tools. I think there are a lot of tools within our calendar applications that are underutilized. So the example I have on the screen here, this person has scheduled themselves their full days, including time for focus, time for communication and emails, time for breaks, personal care. And they're also using the color coding system within this, I believe is Outlook, but I think most tools have the same thing. You can color code items on a calendar to help show variation in the type and the nature of your different items. Scheduling focus time is really useful for folks who have heavy meeting schedules, have to do a lot of strategic thinking work, time that really needs to be dedicated to something for more than just 5 or 10 minutes here and there. Putting that on your calendar and protecting that space for you to complete that work is going to be very useful. And this person also has calls on there, so they have their meetings integrated with that individual work time. Scheduling breaks, so you don't forget those. Those are so important, even though the easiest thing to skip in our day. Using a timer is a really interesting way of managing tasks in almost a way that's gamification. I have a lot of folks who have success using a timer. They say, I'm going to work on this specific task for 25 minutes or for 15 minutes at a time. And then they turn off notifications, emails, and things, and really just dig into one specific task for that amount of time in order to get things done in a way that's focused. Organization systems also help with system or with time management, having ways of organizing documentation, paperwork, process inputs, process outputs, reducing the amount of time that it takes to find stuff. It sounds very simple, but it can make a big difference in how efficient a team operates by saving, small amounts of time throughout a day. That does kind of add up and reduce the stress as someone might be looking for things that are not organized. I like the idea of writing tomorrow's to-do list today for a couple of reasons. We, at the end of the day, have a very keen sense of what needs to be accomplished the next day, right? And so oftentimes we'll wait till the next day to tackle those things. And if you use the evening or the end of your day to write tomorrow's to-do list, you're doing yourself a couple of favors. You're using today's knowledge and experience and perspective to prep you for a solid start in the morning. It also then kind of gives you permission to let go of that mental load and actually take a break from work without having to have rumination over what needs to be done the next day. So it's offloading, but it's also preparation to get started on the right foot the following day. Process management is one of my favorite areas and can be so powerful, especially in teams and offices that maybe don't yet have a process management system. So process management in the graphic I have here represents process, which also includes procedure, which also includes the very detailed work instructions. Documentation of this sort can really enable a team to be more efficient. So documenting processes, work instructions, making these resources accessible to yourself and your team, keeping them current and up to date so they're reliable and repeatable. This also helps to clarify expectations, roles, responsibilities. And if you're in an environment where you have a lot of turnover, we do at MSU right now, turnover is great if you're bringing in new talent, but turnover takes time for onboarding, for training, and you're usually then tying up additional resources to bring new people up to speed. The documentation of processes and expectations can expedite the onboarding process and also give new employees confidence to perform their work if they have reliable documentation to support that effort. So process management is one of the foundational components of a highly effective team and can be done fairly simply with the time that it would take to put the process information together. Another layer to this is prioritization. So if we think about time management, one of the main issues of time management is actually our prioritization of tasks. This is the Eisenhower prioritization matrix. You may have seen this before. It asks you to plot your current task list on 4 quadrants. So what is the urgency, low or high? What is the importance, low or high? And then based on where your tasks fall, you can effectively assign tasks a status of do it now, do it later, delegate it, or take it off the list, right? This helps us maybe take what might feel like a large mass of tasks and really clarify where we should be focusing our efforts first, second, and third. This can help us also manage competing demands. If you're working in an office that's serving multiple leaders or responsible for a number of different projects, this kind of prioritization can be useful in focusing in on what's most important, a response to that fire hose feeling. Also helping us think about one thing at a time, and that concept again of monotasking as opposed to multitasking, taking away distractions and giving yourself dedicated time to work on one specific task with one specific achievable outcome. Again, that helps us get things done, but also build confidence and reduce stress along the way. Communication, we can all agree communication is important for so many reasons, but when it comes to time management specifically, communications around boundaries, communications around expectations, roles and responsibilities, seeking clarification if there's confusion on what's expected. Communication can also help us connect to purpose. I think individuals under a high degree of stress can often feel disconnected from the work. A refocus and a connection to purpose can help drive behavior in a way that's aligned with the values and the mission of the unit. Intentional reactions, what I mean by this is we cannot always control what is asked of us, but we can control how we decide to respond and react to those requests. So being intentional about response can also help us reduce our own internal stress response. And being values guided, if you've defined values within your individual team or organization, refocusing on values is one great way to help individuals and teams stay aligned and operate in a way that is grounded instead of feeling, chaotic and reactive. But where do you begin with all of this? In no way is anyone going to implement all of these things at one time. Where to begin is really a reflection of your own personal needs. So what is your work style? What is the strengths of yourself and your team? What external pressures are present? And are there triggers that you can identify as primary sources of stress and time management issue? If we can identify low-hanging fruit, those are the easy ways to get quick wins, implement small changes, incremental improvements that make a big difference over time. Identifying pain points is another way to do this. So are there particular areas where you feel pressure regularly and consistently? Those may be places to identify opportunities for improvement, because then over time, then you create more space for yourself to then look at additional other areas. And then team collaboration. If you're on a team and the team is feeling these same senses of stress and time management issue, maybe working together as a team to identify solutions is both a great way to build trust and team building, but also find a way for the team to collectively work in a more effective way. And everyone has great ideas and may have different solutions than you can come up with. So engaging teams in discussion like this can be a really powerful way to move everyone forward. I'm not quite sure where I'm at on time, but I'd be happy to answer questions. Like I said, each one of these areas could be dug into to a deeper degree. If you find something that's interesting to you that you want to learn more about, I'd be happy to answer questions right now. But I also just want to acknowledge that I think a lot of people are in the same boat where we're feeling like there's too much to manage for the amount of time that there is. And I just empathize with that feeling and hope that some of these things might bring ideas to you that you can implement in your areas to ease some of that, at least to a small degree.
Thanks so much, Danielle. That was indeed very informative, and also a lot of tools that you put out there for people to think about and use. I know from personal experience working in a legislative offices has its moments, certainly its ups and downs in terms of time available to get tasks done. Especially when legislators are in session and in the office on any particular day. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand or put them in the chat. More than happy to take those. Danielle, can you talk a little bit more about the concept of monotasking? I think that was the first time that I've ever heard that as compared to multitasking.
Yeah, it is an emerging phrase that I'm hearing more and more in the community. And there are actually folks who offer online Zoom monotasking sessions, which is kind of where I've heard about this. And the idea is that you have a dedicated time frame. If you do this in a team, this is really supporting a lot of folks who are working remotely. The idea is that you start the session by setting an intention. So you say, I'm working on this project and my goal is to get this deliverable completed within the next 45 minutes. And then everyone in the session basically goes silent. You turn off notifications, cell phones, emails, Teams, whatever would be pulling at your attention. You reduce all of that and you just work on achieving that one result within that time frame that's dedicated. When you do this in a session with other people, when the 45 minutes is up, the facilitator comes back on and everyone does a check-in. How did it go? Did you meet your deliverable? Did you achieve your intended outcome for this session? And the results that I'm hearing are that people are able to then, in this framework, accomplish a task in a much shorter amount of time than they would if they tried to do it within the context of their everyday work. Just thinking about how those distractions pull at our attention and we leave and we come back and we leave and we come back, and you lose thought time in doing that redirection. So the monotasking concept is really to help us get something done and accomplished in a more concise way than as we do normally in our day-to-day work. But terminology is new to me as well.
Yeah. Danielle, could you maybe you could stop your screen share at
Oh,
this
yeah.
point in time too? I'd love to hear from any of the staffers about that concept. as I recall, my experience on, certainly on any particular session day, in particular in the legislature, I wonder how realistic monotasking is as the phone is ringing, members are having meetings in the office or in committees, and they're asking for some specific information on something. Certainly I can see on non-session days when it's a little bit quieter, maybe a little bit, the pace is a little bit less active when monotasking might be a possibility, but it's certainly something that I think it's interesting to give it a term, because I know that I try that every now and then, right? I'm just going to focus on this one task in front of me and get it done and shut out all the noise, the emails, the messages, the phone calls, and so on and so forth. And I think it's worth, I definitely think it's worth thinking about. There's been a lot written, or that I've been reading about the dangers of multitasking, right? I mean, it goes along with everything else in our society these days, people being bombarded from all sides via communication, and then multitasking just kind of adds to it. So certainly something for people to be thinking about. Any thoughts from those with us today on the concepts that Danielle shared with us, or any questions? All right, Danielle, if you could stick with us for a few minutes while we get into our next speaker, we might have a question or two pop up. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Suzanne Mandel serves as the print production manager in the Legislative Service Bureau. As many of you know, the council is charged with maintaining bill drafting, research, and other services. And again, we thought it would be a good time for a refresher on those matters, as no doubt the offices are going to be getting into printing publications and booklets and other things over the course of the next several months. Suzanne, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Arnold. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me participate in this session this morning. Yes, happy Friday. What a great day it looks to be. Again, I'm Suzanne from the Legislative Printing Division, the implant printer for the Michigan Legislature. So to start out with, the House has its own set of caucus printing coordinators. These individuals are there to assist you and to submit your printing requests to our division. Now to talk about the printing guidelines specifically this morning, the Legislative Council has a set of printing guidelines, which consists of 37 individual rules spanning over what kind of paper can be used to print on, what ink colors can be used, to what can and cannot be printed. There are items that are prohibited for us to print, and I'll get a little bit more into that in a few minutes here. And then there's also a rule on who is the approving authority over the content that we are able to print. So moving on to that, the House, in particular, the House Business Office also has a set of printing guidelines. These run very parallel to the Legislative Council printing rules. So it's, like I said, they run parallel. Basically, when a printing request, especially newsletters, are submitted, they will go through an approval process through the business office first for review, content approval, and then the caucus printing coordinators will submit your order to the printing division, which is where I work, obviously. And then the content of your newsletter is also reviewed again for the Legislative Council printing rules. Now, because they run parallel, usually if the business office approves something, the Legislative Council, it's going to pass those same guidelines. There are some times where we do double check on some content items. And, but however, for the most part, as long as the House Business Office has approved the content, it's good to go for printing. Now, there are several rules that tend to, that you might want to be aware of that are prohibited from us to print. This includes logos, anything that is of a profitable organization, those are prohibited from us to print. Also, content that would be considered more personal or partisan in nature. And then also we try to, the Legislative Council and the House Business Office has rules against negative connotation or references, especially against the legislature or other legislators. So those are some rules that you basically need to be aware of and should try to avoid using in your content. Again, your House printing coordinators will assist you with that content. You also have policy and writers that help with that. So those rules are not often violated, if you will. However, it's just something to be aware of. So as I said, prior to submitting your print request, the business office would be approving that content. So that's about it. I mean, we do have our printing guidelines available on our MySource intranet, which you should have a link from your own house intranet to view not only our printing guidelines, but also our other printing resources. And again, if there's any questions, please feel free to ask me. And I think that's about it. Short and sweet, Arnold.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Sure.
Do we have any questions for Suzanne at this point in time? Any thoughts? Okay. And I know that there are also, and those folks from the business offices can correct me, I know that there are also rules from the House and Senate business offices as well regarding printing that have to be followed. So certainly before you do any such thing, be sure you're checking with your respective business office regarding printing rules.
Correct.
Again, thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate you taking time, and a handout that Suzanne has is available on our website. We do have a question. And who decides the printing rules, and are they ever changed?
The Legislative Council, there is a council that consists of members of the legislature, including leadership, who both from the House and Senate. And it is a body that makes up the rules, the guidelines, and then also is the approving authority for any changes that would want to be made. Basically, it's presented to the council and they either deny it or approve it.
Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Any other folks with a question or a comment? I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Oh, it's pretty straightforward, Arnold.
Yep, understood. Well, thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, you're welcome.
I guess that's going to give us a longer break at this point in time. And so we will take a break. Our next session starts at 10 after 11. So please rejoin us at that time, and we'll send out a alert to let you know that we're coming back as well. So again, thank you for being with us today, and please do rejoin us in about 20 minutes for our next session of a state agency roundtable featuring personnel from the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Financial and Insurance Services, as well as the Department of Treasury. So should be pretty informative. Thanks all for being with us, and we'll see you in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
With all of the positions that you all have and the responsibilities that you all have on a daily basis too. And so, you know, I take that seriously in my role here at DHHS and understanding, you know, how much of a resource that we can be to all of your offices. And our team here at DHHS, our legislative team, is great. As you all already know that, and I'm happy to be here, part of the team, happy to be here today. And one last thing I wanted to know is that we do have a legislative analyst position open here at DHHS, and maybe in the chat I can share that with you all. So if you know of anyone that might need or might be looking for a job in government or in one of the departments here, this might be something that they might be interested in. So I'll share that, and I will stop talking and turn this back over to Lorna.
Okay, thanks, Ramiro. We're really glad you're here. Let me figure out now how I share my screen. Come on. Here we go. All right. Okay. Share. There you go. So as I've introduced myself, I'm Lorna Elliott Egan. I'm with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and I manage the constituent services work that we do here in the department. We have two wonderful staff right now, Adam DeLay and Marina Vyzhikovsky, who do most of this very hard work with you. We also have with us Jeff Spitzley today. Marina couldn't be with us. Adam is here. She's in chart, but we are really happy to be here with you today. Let me see if I can move this now. Hold on. There we go. So that gives you the picture of who works in our unit right now. That's Ramiro as director. Jeff is our legislative services manager. He's who your office would work with on legislation. I help with constituent services, and I also have a role as the liaison for the department with the Michigan tribes. Marina is our legislative analyst at this time and works on constituent services as well. Adam is dedicated and does a great job in constituent services. Jackie McKee is who you would work with in order to try to schedule a meeting with any of us. So here we go. So we provide constituent services to 148 legislative offices, the governor's offices, 14 US congressional offices, and 2 US Senate offices. And we know that the work that you do with your constituents to try to help them in with the things that we do in our department can be very challenging. We see up to 50 emailed cases hit our email box just about every day. Last year, we addressed close to 5,000 constituent cases for your offices. And on average, about 3/4 of those cases are human services and Medicaid benefit inquiries related to your specific constituents' beneficiary cases, their benefits. We try to respond and resolve all of our cases within a week or less, if it's possible. If it's an emergency, we try to do that within 24 hours. Some complex, in some cases can be really complex. And so they can take more than 2 weeks for us to get an answer. And sometimes it's taken almost a month in some instances. But we do work with our staff internally to try to make sure. We do work with our staff internally to try to get resolution for your constituents as quickly as possible. There we go. Okay. The things that we assist you with are on a whole wide, it's a big department. There's 15,000 of us here. For your constituents, we're going to help you with their eligibility for benefits for programs like food assistance, cash. So there's the Family Independence Program for people with children, or the State Disability Assistance Program for individuals that need cash assistance, Medicaid, state emergency relief, child development and care, and Medicare cost sharing are some of the programs that your beneficiaries are eligible for. We do some work on licensure, but really only for youth group homes and for EMS providers. We license them. We also license foster care homes. Under Medicaid services, so if you have a doctor's office call and say, hey, I'm not getting paid, what's going on? We work with provider services on billing issues, on your constituent billing problems, and then on home health, home help, and private duty care. Public health, we look at tobacco regulation, women, infants, and children services. We look at lead. The Flint water programs were handled by our public health. We work on PFAS and PFAS with Eagle, actually. And we also work very intensely on public health emergency response, which is the COVID response that you've seen us working on with your constituents for the last 2 years. We also try to assist when we're able to with community mental health service cases and with habilitation service waiver cases. But the CMH system is actually independent from us and handled at the local level. So we only have so much ability to help with those, but we do try whenever possible if you have people having difficulty within the mental health system. Okay. This is really important. We are not allowed to release any kind of personal information, personal protected health information, or protected personal information under any circumstances. In almost every case that we get from the legislative office, with rare exceptions, involve that kind of information. And because of this, our legal department requires that we get release forms filled out by your constituent. We ask that you have the constituent, if they need to take a photograph of the completed form, signed form, and send that to you, then you can forward that to us. But we request that those documents be sent to you and that your office then sends those cases on to us with those release forms. So we can go ahead and get started for you. Okay, this is, I wasn't able to get the newer forms put on this slide quickly enough, but this just gives you a sense of our forms. They're looking a little different now. We also provide them in Spanish and Arabic on request. We will be sending these forms and a brochure about our services out to all the offices. I did provide those to Arnold, so he may have sent those on to you. One thing we want you to take a look at is my little arrow here. There's a section, and it doesn't quite look like this particular form, but it says date. I can hardly read that, but basically date or event or condition. And if you have a constituent put a date there, that's the date that they sign it, it actually nullifies that form. So what we ask is that you keep an eye on that piece, because if we get that form back with a date there that is close to the date you send it to us, we only have that much time to give you information legally. We can't give you information after that. So you want to make sure that we prefer they don't sign that, because these forms are good for a year from the time that they sign. The other thing is, these are two different forms here. One is for most of everything that we do, but the other one is specific for HIPAA and anything that is medical. We ask that you fill out, when you send a constituent case to us, Even if it's just medical or just food assistance, we ask that you see if your constituent is willing to sign both of those forms and send those to us, because if they come back to you in 6 months and say, now my Medicaid's screwed up, you won't have to go through the process of getting those forms done again and send them back to us. We keep them in our files, in our records, because we could get audited. So we always keep those documents. They're good for a year. Okay. So our constituent casework procedure that we recommend is that you have your constituent fill out and sign the MDHHS release forms. You'll get those forms hopefully through Arnold, but we are going to send them out next week. If the person contacting you is not the beneficiary themselves, if they're a guardian or a power of attorney for the constituent, then please have them execute that form and sign it. But we'll need a copy of the guardianship papers or the power of attorney paperwork to come in with that form as well, to prove that they have the right to access the information related to that beneficiary. We have to have those documents signed. Without a signature, we can't release information. Please scan everything in, and if you can, do it into one document and email it to mdhhs-legislative@michigan.gov. And if it's an emergency, if it's really urgent, please make sure that you check that little exclamation point that comes through on your email so that we see it in the email box and look at it right away. If you don't mark that, it may be a day or two before we can get to your case, because we go through them as they come in. If you have something that's really tricky, you're just not sure how to address it, you are welcome to call me directly on my work cell, which is 517-512-4146. Or if I don't seem to be around, try the main line at 517-241-1629, and we will get you in touch with somebody that can help you figure out what needs to be done with your case, because sometimes they're just really emergent. We need to take care of them right away, and it doesn't hurt for you to give us a call and say, hey, I need help now. Okay. Something that is also really important to know is that we're prohibited by Michigan law from releasing any kind of information at all to any third party on child protective services cases, adoption cases, foster care cases, child support cases. Those 4 types of cases, we can't give you any information, even with a release form. We are prohibited by law from doing that. We can't tell you anything. We can provide for you for those types of cases numbers to the Office of Children's Ombudsman and the Office of Family Advocate, so that your constituent can contact those entities. The Office of Children's Ombudsman sort of oversees what our children's services staff does. So if the complaint is that we have done the wrong thing or done a bad job, that's where that would go. If it's a relative saying, my niece or my cousin's daughter is having problems and we need to address those, we can't really tell them, but if they call the Office of Family Advocate, that office will be able to explain to them what their rights and responsibilities are in the context of a particular case. Just know that these are very, very emotional cases that you will be getting, and we understand that. So sometimes if you get them to provide a very detailed description of what the problem is, we need the name of the child and the date of birth of the child, we can send that on to our Children's Services Agency for them to look at, make sure that we are doing everything that we are supposed to be doing on any given case. And then unfortunately, all we can do is pass that information forward and trust that they're going to do that. Always know if there's any concern about safety or welfare of a vulnerable adult or a child, we really need to have your constituents contact, and not you, the constituent must contact centralized intake immediately at the number provided on this slide. I can't actually see it here. That's 855-444-3911. Anytime somebody's in danger of being abused or neglected, somebody needs to contact and give complete information. They will run a triage, ask appropriate questions, and evaluate what needs to be done next. And you can let your constituents know that we can probably not give them information on what we've done with that investigation, but it will be looked at. We do not ignore those calls ever. The last thing we ask from you in doing the work that you do with your constituents is please don't give our email address out to them or any telephone numbers directly to your constituents. We have a very small staff working on this type of work. And so if we were to take those calls and start having conversations with your constituents, we probably would never be able to keep up. The other thing we ask is if you want information from us, or if you feel a need to have a conversation with somebody inside our department, or if your boss wants to have a conversation with somebody inside our department, please contact our Legislative Affairs Office or Ramiro, so that we can make sure to connect you with the right people and services, because very often we're a huge department. Very often somebody thinks they've found the right person to address something for them, and they're not. So we'll make sure you get to the right person. That's all I've got today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but it looks like Arnold needs to move us along here.
Thank you, Lorna. If you could stop sharing your screen, that'd be great. That was great information. Really, I think helpful for people to understand who they should contact and the information they need to have as they go ahead and contact your office. So thank you again. And Ramiro, congratulations, and appreciate you being here as well. Let's move next to the Department of Treasury and William Sawyer. William?
Hi, Arnold, and hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. Arnold, if I can get your team to put up the points of contact, please. We'll be working with that a great deal. Again, my name is William Sawyer Todd. I've worked in Treasury for 19 plus years. I worked in the legislature nearly a decade before that. I've known Arnold for, I figured out last night, for over 35 years. Treasury is very guarded about information. Why? Because people are very careful about their information, anything to do with Treasury finances. So bear with me when I tell you frequently in an email that we have disclosure provisions in state statute that prohibit me from sharing many things. Now that we have the sheets up, take a look at the points of contact, the public area. People can get the status of their refund, which is where's my refund is by far the biggest question that we get in Treasury. All they need is the 5 shared secrets from their tax information. On the other side, we have business taxes. Those are the 2 biggest groups, individual income tax and business taxes. Business taxes can call various lines. They have Michigan Treasury Online available to them, and it is a wonderful way to keep accounts, etc., with Treasury. So both of those 2 are for public use. For legislative use only, the dark blue you see, legislation and policy questions go to Aaron Keel and Peter Mormon in our Government Affairs Office. That would be like any proposals you have to ask about. Anything recently that has passed, that would all go to Aaron and Peter at that number provided, 335-7505. However, the most important part of this document, it's coming up next in the light blue, and that is Treasury Inquiry at michigan.gov. And I see that's misspelled, so we'll have that corrected. That's Treasury_inquiry at michigan.gov. And that usually comes to me. I work this for Monday through Thursdays. I'm usually at home on Friday, but Arnold asked, and I am here for you today. So let's go a little bit deeper. You've got a constituent on the line, and you have no idea what they're talking about. Try to get them to whittle down exactly what's going on. First of all, find out if they're talking about a federal return as opposed to a state return. We can't help you with a federal return. but I can help guide you where to get more answers on that. If they've received a letter from Treasury and it says to do something, ask them what they've done so far. It's very simple. It sounds simplistic, but a lot of people get a Treasury letter and they're terrified. And what do? They go to your office and say, what can I do? But what we need to know is what they have done so far. They need to answer the letter somehow or other. So ask them what they've done. If you have something by email from a constituent, send it all to me. You can't send me enough until I have an IT person come running around the corner and saying, you broke my internet, something like that. And it's never happened so far. We love information. The more information we get, the better it is in almost every case. Now, further down, for income tax issues, if you have the Social Security number, which is critical for us, by the way, if you have a Social Security number, a last name of the constituent, the tax year or the return in question, adjusted gross income or total household resources, and the filing status, that is implied consent, and you can get a lot more information from us. If you don't have that, or if they refuse to give you the Social Security number, and everybody is very worried about privacy these days, and with very good reason. If you can get at least the last 4 digits of the Social Security number, that will help us enormously. And the first and last name of the constituent, the tax year or the return in question, adjusted gross income or total household resources, the filing status, their email address, and a phone number. Those are really important for us. We can probably not have to bother you again with the case until we say it's resolved. If you have implied consent, I can go into more detail what happened. Business taxes are also the same way, but instead of a Social Security number, what we need is the complete federal employer identification number. That's the tax ID. And the tax ID will open doors. It's assigned by the federal government, of course. That's why the feds are in there. It comes from the IRS specifically. And with that information, I can identify what exactly business we're talking about. We need to know the business name, how the person that's calling you is connected with the business. Are they an officer, owner, legal contact, something of that nature? If you have an email address from them and a phone number, an address for the business, the tax type they're talking about, we have different business taxes. If you can zero in on that, that is extremely helpful for us. And of course, the tax years and the periods in question. If there are any questions on that at this point, we'll continue to move on. Those are the 2 biggest categories that we deal with at Treasury: individual income tax and business taxes. However, there's also 3 more that come second. The first of these would be our collections. In a collections case, I would need the same thing as in the income tax and business taxes. If it's about an individual, I'll need their Social Security number, or at least the last 4 digits, as much information as you can tell me why this person has a question about collections. That's very, very helpful. And we can go from there. If it's about a business, we'll need that FEIN. Sometimes it's a TR number, but usually it's an FEIN that comes from the federal government. That helps us zero in exactly which business we're talking about. And if you can tell me as much as possible about why they would need to work something out with collections, what's at issue, we can certainly shepherd it through as much as possible. What are the 2 things that are of the 5 major things involved, categories that I said in Treasury, because there are many, it's a large department with many responsibilities. The first probably would be unclaimed property. All unclaimed property is centralized in Treasury. What do I need there? I need a property ID number. And I also need for the name, of course, that the claimant is under. We can see what kind of ripples are if someone's already applied for something, or they're just searching, or whatever is needed. Get with me at that treasinquiry@michigan.gov. I'll be glad to help. The 5th of the categories that we deal with, the larger categories are student financial services, post-secondary, in other words, college level, but it's not always college, post-secondary education. And in those cases, I'll need some sort of account number, social security number of the student involved, something along those lines. Does anyone have any questions for me in the chat at this point? Anybody have any questions in general? I know I want to cover an enormous amount of ground. In some cases, my response to you will be, I'll need authorization. And we'll go over that piece by piece when that happens. Do not fail to write me at treasinquiry@michigan.gov. If I'm not there, and again, I'm not usually there on Fridays, someone else will pick it up, or I'll pick it up on Monday. If you have an emergency, we can work that out as well.
William, we've posted the points of contact sheet. Can you get us a new one with the corrected email address there of the constituent line? I know you said that it was
that will certainly happen.
Yeah, incorrect. And then we'll make that available again on our website and email it to all attendees. I'm not seeing anything in the chat or a hand raised right now. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that's all said from my end.
Okay. Well, thank you for spending time with us this Friday. Appreciate the information, very comprehensive, and I think it'll be very helpful to member offices. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Next, we have Joseph Sullivan. Joseph is with the Department of Insurance and Financial Services, and I see he's already contributed to the chat. So Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Arnold. And Arnold, if you could put the links that I provided in the chat too, that would be helpful. I was trying to do that. Yeah, my name is Joseph Sullivan, and I am the Insurance Legislative Liaison at the Michigan Department of Insurance and Financial Services, aka DIFS. Feel a little bit bad. It looks like DHHS is rolling deep today with multiple people. It's just me from DIFS here with you all today. But I did serve as a staffer in the House for over a decade. For a handful of members, I was actually on the same floor the entire time, but I did make the transition to DIFS about a year and a half ago. So I'm happy to speak about that experience if there are particular questions about making that adjustment and transition. As liaison, my responsibilities include fielding policy questions from legislative offices and stakeholders. On constituent issues, we have a specific office in DIFS called our Office of Consumer Services, which I coordinate with and forward legislative cases over to. I also communicate updates to legislative offices on those specific cases should they have questions or want to be updated as those advance. I coordinate on legislation, which includes reviewing drafts, providing committee testimony, developing and communicating feedback on potential revisions to the bill language. I work on several work groups for the department on outreach issues, such as health insurance enrollment, policy topics, or on the development of model legislation. Of course, I'm also given the catch-all that is the special project. So my day-to-day does vary quite a bit, but I'm frequently in communication with legislators and stakeholders. That's a consistent aspect of my role here at the department. So as for some background on DIFS, we are fee funded and do not require tax dollars to operate. We are a much smaller department than DHHS with well under 400 staff. Our guiding principle is that we are regulators, and that means that we work for the public as a consumer protection agency. We regulate Michigan's insurance and financial industries, which include insurance agents, companies, mortgage companies, payday lenders, state chartered banks, and credit unions. We do have two liaisons, one for financial services issues and one for insurance issues, which is me. I've found that every department is structured a little bit differently as far as how their liaison roles are, but we have two. And so Ross Yednock is the point person on financial services, and I am the point person on insurance related matters. So I will say, as far as what DIPS strives to do, we want to foster economic opportunity for Michigan consumers, ensure fair access to institutions that are safe, sound, and entitled to public confidence, and provide financial and insurance education to help people understand their options. So in that, we want to hear from legislative offices. We're here to help you with your policy issues, your constituent cases, or any other items that are before our regulatory purview. Just to note a few topical policy items that you might be coming across. Auto no fault reform, of course, is a big issue. And with that, the MCCA rebate checks that should have gone out from insurers. I notice a lot of offices have been fielding inquiries from that and sending those my way. Prescription drug policy, in particular insulin pricing, and any insurance related provisions related to that. And then two big health policy items that made it through the legislature recently were pharmacy benefit manager reform and prior authorization reform. So a few of the common issues that we're contacted about are if someone is concerned that an insurance company is unfairly delaying or denying your claim, or charging the wrong premium, or otherwise it's just not performing as required under the law. And if a resolution with an insurance company cannot be reached, we have a formal complaint process that is on our website, or you can contact me personally to get the ball rolling. I always communicate those issues to our Office of Consumer Services, and they can help facilitate the consumer starting that official complaint with the department. So as far as some tips to communicating with DIFs, or I guess liaisons in general, if you don't know who to reach out to at DIFs, I'm happy to be the primary point of contact. That is the case for many other departments as well, I think, with their liaisons. I would say to gather as much information on the front end as possible, things like case specifics, contact information for the constituent, which insurance company you're dealing with, and also make sure that the constituent is fine with DIFs reaching out directly to that constituent, which is what we often like to do. Our Office of Consumer Services then assigns a specific analyst to each of these cases for an individual complaint. The analyst will be the point of contact for the constituent throughout the entire process, and then we can add legislative offices as an interested party and provide them updates as necessary. Generally, we find it best to have the DIFs analyst work directly with the constituent and insurance company to find a resolution. As you all know that have worked on insurance topics, it can be quite complicated and there are a lot of variables involved. But as I noted, we do like to keep your offices updated if that is something you would like. If you do contact us about an issue that is not under our purview, we will do our best to direct you where appropriate. This could be the federal government, another state department, or even legal avenues. We commonly get contacted about unemployment insurance, which is under the UIA, workers' comp, which is under LEO, and Medicaid issues, which of course are under DHHS, who's on the call. So those are topics that are not on our purview that we do get contacted about, but we make sure to forward those where appropriate. So if you do need an update on a specific case, if you have a bill draft that you want us to look at, or if you have a question about an insurance related matter, then please give us a call or email us. In the chat, I put my personal contact information as well as contact information for our constituent area of the department. If it is a policy issue, we always appreciate that a legislative office does a bit of research to better understand the issue prior to reaching out, but it's definitely not a requirement. But we do not expect you to be insurance experts or have a complete understanding of the issue you're contacting us about, but just to have a general understanding of what specifically you're asking. I do commonly have to seek input internally from other areas in the department on issues that I'm contacted about. We have several different areas in the department. They all have different expertise and insight that they provide. On that note, your timeline on policy issues might not always align with ours. Our review process is pretty extensive. Some bills have to be reviewed, as I said, by multiple areas of the department. Sometimes we need to find consensus on what our response is going to be, and often we need to streamline that feedback for your consumption. We do provide a lot of resources on our site. I wanted to flag that. We have toolkits that provide updates on common issues like auto no faults and health insurance enrollment. We have FAQs with policy answers on common topics. I know we have one on auto no fault reform on common issues that you're going to be getting in your offices, as well as the MCCA refunds. And we do have links to other guides and informational materials on our webpage. But just in summary, just to leave it as, please use us as a resource. We want to help you with your policy questions and your issues. We want to assist your constituents that have complaints or concerns. And we want to give you input on any potential legislation that you're working on. And then lastly, I will just leave a note of potential career paths. So something I didn't quite realize when I was working in the legislature is that state departments, they do value skills and experience that legislative staff acquire along the way. There are similar and more specialized positions in state departments. There are roles specific in state departments to scheduling and administrative support, analysts that help with constituent issues, if you're interested in the constituent side of things, and then policy analysts that review legislation, not to mention the liaisons that serve in more of a government affairs capacity. So if you enjoy one particular aspect of your legislative job, there are opportunities for a career path in a state department in a similar, yet a more focused role tailored to what your interests are. So I'm happy to field any questions about my experiences or DIFs or just liaisons in general. I did, like I mentioned, put the contact information in the chat, and I think Arnold has some links to resources he can share with you. But thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Greatly appreciate you taking time with us this morning. And I want to thank Lorna and William as well, and really all our speakers for their time, and you all for being with us. Please, if you have got a question for any of these folks, put it in the chat or raise your hand. As we noted earlier, information, the presentations, the contacts will all be emailed to attendees along with a link to a recording of this program in the next early next week, and will also be posted on our website. And again, really appreciate everyone on really this first gorgeous Friday that we've had this spring or summer or whatever season we're in here in Michigan. And so I'm actually pretty glad that we're only doing a morning session, because I don't know how many of you would really want to be back for the afternoon. I certainly don't blame you. Again, we'll hang on a minute. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing a hand raise. Please also, we'd ask that you fill out our evaluation. There it is. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy Kyle, our marketing and communications, has put a link to our evaluation. Please do fill that out. It helps us understand what topics you'd like us to work on or present in the future. As Matt noted early on, we will be having a third legislative staff training in September after Labor Day, as you come back to the office, as the legislature comes back to session. So with that, I'm still not seeing anything. And at this point, again, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your summer, and we look forward to seeing you in the fall.
Thank you, everyone.